Brothers and sisters, we are always blessed to have a new day to live in. And on this blessed day of Friday, we are called by our Lord to come to remember Him, to gather together in His remembrance and take that remembrance with us in our lives. So we praise Him in abundant praise as our Creator, Provider, Sustainer. May He be glorified and exalted in praise above everything else. We ask Him to send His peace and blessings and mercy on His final messenger, Muhammad, and all of those who follow him until the day of judgment. As believers, we are part of an ummah. We are part of a national, international community of people connected by faith. And the blessings of this community all go back to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And throughout our history, we have many beautiful, shining examples of Islam thriving, of Islamic civilization being built and being rebuilt. So it's important for us not to make judgments upon our history or to see things through sound bites or this event and that person and this subject, but rather to kind of look in on some of the successful models that we have and to try to see how we can recreate those successful models. So we'll start by looking at the history that shaped very recent Islamic work that has reached the corners of the globe. In the year 1908 in the Ottoman Empire, it was ruled by Abdul Hamid II. He was the Sultan, one of the last couple of sultans of the Ottoman Empire. The empire was going through massive decline. Within the last 50 years, it had lost maybe a third of its political influence and control. The notion of Islamic civilization had all but dwindled. And Islam had very little to do in terms of regulating and inspiring the institutions of education, of governance, of military, and the rest of the society. Religion had become relegated to mostly just superficial ritual acts and mysticism. And this proved massively problematic for the nation of believers who were under this Ottoman Empire's control. In a rapidly changing world where there was the Industrial Revolution coming from Europe, the Enlightenment coming from Europe, and the advancements from Europe are moving very fast, the Muslim world is not doing much of anything. So in that environment, there was a 23-year-old young Kurdish man who was an intellectual, who was someone who was deeply attached to Islam. And as a young man, he served as a member of the High Council of Islamic Affairs in Istanbul, which was the capital of the Islamic Empire. So this young 23-year-old man named Saeed Nursi, he came to Sultan Abdul Hamid II and he presented a proposal that he thought was crucial for the future of the Ottomans. He said, we need to develop a model school that will integrate between the religious sciences and the modern secular sciences and create a society that sees the world through Islam and is able to join modernity with an Islamic identity. Sultan Abdul Hamid rejected this proposal. And so Saeed Nursi, Allah yarhamu, one of the great scholars of our time, he continued his teaching, he continued his movement, and he was a very vocal critic of British influence in Turkey. He opposed the growing secular nationalist movement that led to a revolution, which then led to the Turks announcing to the Muslim world that there's no more an Islamic empire or state. We are now the Turkish secular state. And so what is now called Turkey, that was established in 1923. So this new secular state, its champion, its British student, Kemal Ataturk, he tried to keep Saeed Nursi close. Even though he's a young man, he has shown to be very influential and very convincing in his Islamic ways. So he offered Saeed Nursi the Minister of Religious Affairs post. And of course, Sheikh Saeed, he rejected this post. He insisted that Islam should be the source to regulate modernity. The modern world should be regulated by Islam, not the Europeans who had become a godless people. So over time, Saeed Nursi's growing popularity and his teachings had spread all over this secular state of Turkey, to where intellectuals in the colleges, even military personnel and government figures are now kind of rethinking their identity. So they arrested Saeed Nursi as violating the laws of the state, that mandate secularism. And so they sent him far across Turkey in an exiled prison. So then he began to write, which became the future fruition. So he was writing what he called Risala Nur, which is the epistles of light, the treatises of light. And so in that, it's a masterpiece beautifully explaining Islamic creed, Islamic law, Islamic character through the lens of the order of the natural creation, through the lens of how the world is operating. Islam is the governing force of everything. So he focused on the ayat in the Quran and talking about how that is the regulating recognition of divine authority. So there are ayat in creation and there is ayat in revelation, moving the believers to regulate creation and to understand how we fit. So he emphasized that science and religion are natural partners and they should never be separated. Now I can tell you my first exposure to this was in 1999. I was in the Tulsa Mosque where I had converted to Islam in the last year, and I went into the library and I saw some translations of this Risala an-Nur. And I was reading it. At the time, I was coming from Jahiliyyah and I'm just trying to learn how to pray. So it seemed very profound, very deep. But I remember thinking it was very interesting and cool because it was making the Quran more relevant to my mind when the Quran seemed very hard to grasp in its depth and complexity. So that's kind of how I first got introduced to this. Now, during the time of Saeed Nursi, his students, as well as the contemporary scholars from Syria and Palestine and Iraq and Turkey, they started to refer to him as Badi'uz Zaman, the unique wonder of our age, because of his writings and his speeches were just so profoundly bringing the Quranic message to everybody's ideas. And so in the year 2008, they actually did an international survey and they found that there are between 6 and 9 million followers of the Nur movement. Most of those followers are known as the Hizmet movement, the service to God movement. So the question comes, where does this Hizmet thing comes from? So in 1938, a newly found secular Turkey, there was a young man named Muhammad Fethullah Gulen who was born in Anatolia. He comes from a rare family that has maintained all throughout its branches a religious identity. And his father Ramiz was an Imam of a mosque. And you could say by looking at the things he learned from his father that probably he was influenced by Saeed Nursi, but it wasn't a popular thing that you want to be known for in Turkey back then. When he was raised in the Sufi orders, learning character and the spiritual regimen of the remembrance of God. And in 4th grade in a private school, he became first directly influenced to the writings of Saeed Nursi. So as Gulen gets older in the 1960s, he takes a formal route to study the Islamic sciences. And he studies with prominent scholars the different Islamic sciences. As he became 30 years old, his mom jumped in and said, look, Fethullah, you need to tie the knot. Looks like in Turkey they have adopted this phrase. He said, my beloved mother, I have tied the knot to Hizmet, to the service of Islam. So that's where this idea started when he was just a young Imam. He said, my life is dedicated. So like Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam al-Nawawi, Sheikh Fethullah Gulen never got married. He wrote books, he wrote articles, and he inspired and mentored thousands of people. So around that time, he began to read about other revivalist movements. And he reflects that he very much respected the Muslim Brotherhood movement of Egypt, and he respected the Islamic movement of Maududi in Pakistan. And he said all of their general teachings and their revivalist methodology is in line with what I believe and what I feel that I have learned from Saeed Nursi. His only historic objection was that it seems there's too much goal of a political empowerment rather than just focusing on the civilizational growth. And he felt that having a goal of political empowerment may create problems in the intentions of the people who are involved. And so the young Imam Gulen was very impressed by Badi'uz Zaman's works, The Wonder of the Age, and he then began teaching people, expounding upon those things. And in his sermons, he would read articles of what's going on in Turkey, and then he would take references from the light episodes, and he would talk about things in a relevant way. And he used to actually put out on a Monday, he would put a sign out in front of the mosque, this is what we're going to be talking about in the khutbah Jummah, you know. And so people really liked that kind of organized expectation. So he had this phrase that Imam Gulen said that the head and the heart should always be in agreement. That spirituality should govern what you're dealing with in your daily interaction. It should be managing what is going on in the real world, and that your ability to express religion should have a logical, practical application. His teachings were about making the remembrance of God and the spiritual regimen and the hereafter a motivation for building society, for doing good, to service to the best interests of the people. So from 1973 to 1983, he started organizing these small group study circles where they would take the Saeed Nursi writings and then study them and then talk about how they are relevant in their lives. He also began encouraging his students and followers to start summer camps and to create a kind of dormitory of believers who work together at colleges, and those who are having homes next to and apartments next to colleges, to give a place for the young up-and-coming students to have their Islamic identity developed. He encouraged them to create a networking model of entrepreneurship and business empowerment. So then they started working together in their businesses and finding out how businesses can work together and building their social capital. They bought the Zaman newspaper, and then they started to really put a lot of effort and money and spreading a monthly publication throughout Turkey in the religious mindset. His followers, many of them became journalists and writers. A number of them became school teachers, a large number of them, thousands and thousands of them actually. And so they would be school teachers from elementary all the way to the top academics of graduate studies. And you would find by 1993 in Turkey, it's well known that all of the educational institutions have these Hizmet people in the upper echelons of whether it be elementary school or college. So that is the kind of civilizational Islamic grassroots movement that he started. We ask Allah to bless us to be able to carry Islam for our generations here in Charlotte in a similar manner. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فإنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In 1983, this secular state realized that its clamping down on waqf, on endowments, has created problems for their institutionality in the society. They need the public sector to start to, and the private sector to work together in foundations and social support. So they opened the door for people to start their own foundation. So of course the Hizmet community started to establish many different foundations and institutions for charitable work, but mostly for schools, but also for media and the means of supporting media as a publicly supported trust, not as a private profit endeavor. And so they began developing this. And so they established a couple of universities and many schools that within 10 years, all of the top universities in Turkey were known to be Hizmet managed and run. In 1993, they bought Samanyalu television, which is the Milky Way. And so then they started to put Islamic programming where, whether it be actual sitcoms or whether it be discussions on morals and society or what's going on in the world, and they would open the door for that. From 1994, they saw that the downfall of the Soviet Union was a huge opportunity. So then Imam Gulen started to send his students as missionaries to all of these countries in order to establish schools and create business models where people can support people that are believers because they've been under many years of communism. And so he started dialogue institutes where they would dialogue with Christians, Jews, Hindus, seculars, atheists, and they started to do international dialogue institutes. And so at this point, they had established themselves in the world. So in 1996, the Hizmet community founded the Bank of Asia. So they started their own bank. And in 2009, The World Bank, I guess, analysis group, they rank the top 500 banking institutions in the entire world, which are of many tens of thousands of banks. And the Asia Bank was the number 403 in the world's banks with 182 branches. In 1997, the young mayor of Istanbul, this young, dynamic Recep Erdogan, is posing with a picture with his elder friend and ally, Imam Gulen, at the Asia Bank, talking about how they are establishing Islam in Turkey, and the welfare party of the Muslim community is starting to gain a momentum in there's a guy named Erdogan, who was the leader of that, who was the mentor of Erdogan. So at that time, they were kind of on the same page about needing to bring Islam to their country. And we saw the crackdown. A coup happened where the seculars came down on the welfare party and other parties, and they started treating them like they're trying to Islamicize and create a new country within a country. And so then Erdogan was charged with Islamism, and that he was reciting extremist poetry. And Erdogan was put in jail for 4 months. Imam Gulen had been previously, 20 years ago, under the secular regime, put in jail for 7 months for Islamism again. So at that time, Imam Gulen noticed that the government is coming to his house, and they're going to some of his followers, and they're starting to ask all these very intrusive questions that he felt is a move against his movement. Now, he himself and his movement have never been part of politics. They're not a political group. They don't support directly politicians. Some among them were in the political movement of getting people to vote for mostly Erdogan and his group. And so Gulen said, you know what, I feel like there's something happening here. And he flew to America. And within months, his intuition was correct. The secular regime of Turkey brought charges of corruption and conspiracy against the state, against Gulen in absentia. So they are saying that he was trying to take down the state with his corrupt endeavors. And so they started these hearings that took 6 years. And by 2006, Imam Fethullah Gulen was acquitted in the High Court of Criminal Charges. In the year 2007, the mostly secular Supreme Court brought an appeal. Some people brought an appeal to this acquittal, to the top court of Turkey. And they said, no, this Gulen, he is collaborating with forces to bring down Turkey and destroy Turkey. And in 2008, the Turkish Supreme Court issued a vote of 17-6 in a formal final acquittal of Fethullah Gulen, which is by all process of due law with evidence and actual, that made him remain someone who is always known to be a person innocent of any crime. They continued their work, inspiring, motivating, establishing Islamic civilization in a world that is filled with corruption. So by the year 2015, the Hizmet movement has millions of followers in dozens of countries with hundreds of schools, mentorship networks, charitable foundations, banks, and dialogue institutes. Their collective assets are well into the many billions at that point. I came to know these people first in the year 2015 when I moved to Tulsa. And I was invited to lead a convert group at the Raindrop Dialogue Institute, which was about 5 miles away from our mosque. And so when I went there, you know, it was a very, very hospitable people, very kind, caring, loving people. And we had this meeting, and then they asked me in a very humble way. They said, you know what, we have these dialogue events where we bring in different people to talk from different religious persuasions. And we, have, a lot of, strongly knowledgeable people in our community, but we have an accent and a lack of English strength. So we thought maybe you could come and represent Islam in a dialogue. So I did that on a number of occasions. And I remember in early 2016, they told me that in July, I was going to be invited to go on a mission where they would pay for everything to see Turkey for the first time. And they're like, yeah, no, we're going to pay for this. We have all the people there, and they'll put you up and everything, and we'll go there, and this will be a beautiful thing. So I was all excited about that, and then things didn't work out for that, as you can imagine. So when I returned to Charlotte in the year 2017, we were in the gymnasium down the road. Actually, that gymnasium is now a Gulen school called TMSA. And so we were there, and this property was just trees and an old rundown farmhouse. And so two of the families that were instrumental since the gymnasium in working and building our abilities to grow and to put the work together, two of that core team are people from the Hizmet movement. And so, alhamdulillah, in 2019, I was invited to give a weekend seminar on Islam and culture and understanding how to navigate the American experience from an Islamic paradigm at the Respect Graduate Institute, which is a college from the Hizmet community in Pennsylvania. So on the second day of my seminar, it's very interesting. This guy came to me and he said, I'm a student from Australia. So they have students that are there studying with Fethullah Gulen from Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, all kinds of people, right? And so he says, I think you should come meet Fethullah Gulen. So I said, okay, that'll be interesting. I would love to meet him. You know, I have some questions that might be, I'm not sure how you guys would feel about that, but when I get to meet somebody, I have to know exactly where we're at. Now I can deal with somebody as it is. And they was like, yeah, no problem. You know, it's a free country. Ideas are free to talk about, no problem. So we went and we had a very cordial conversation, and it was obvious that the man is very old and he requires a walker, and you know, he's not very agile or anything like that. And I thought that was a very interesting experience. What I noticed was, while the people revere him greatly as a leader and as an inspirational motivator and teacher, their allegiance is to Islam and the work of Islam, which is why when he passed away a couple of days ago, may Allah have mercy on him and envelop him in his grace, he did not say, okay, here's the leader of my movement. He just left people with writings and speeches and things, and he expects them to do what he did, to find out about how we can carry on as the Prophet ﷺ left, and so to see what they think is the right way to take this movement on. And so that is the beautiful tradition of Islam, is that people pick up from our scholars and they try to do everything they can to utilize the tools necessary and to bring people together on a mission to promote Islam in the world. And so it's important for all of us to see that Saeed Nursi, Fethullah Gulen, Imam Hassan al-Banna, Abu Ala Maududi, and many others throughout our history, thousands of others all over the world, we don't know many of their stories. Those are all human beings like you and I. They're not prophets, they're not holy men that came down from heaven. They're people who decided to commit themselves to Islam. And they're people who inspired other peoples to do that. They're people who brought unity amongst people. You have Maulana Ilyas in Pakistan, the Jamaat Tabligh has done a lot of great work for the world. So you have all these different scholars. And so we can pull from all of that and we can move each other in that direction. And the key of all of this is that Islam is the governing factor of our body, of our mind, and of the world around us. We just have to understand in a very deep, intimate way how all of that works so that we can promote this work to the world. And then when the people see the light by actual understanding and practical application, it will be a natural thing to embrace the social effects of that. And I'm using a different word here rather than the P word, right? The social effects of Islam being lived will be felt and appreciated and encouraged. And people will all naturally move in that direction. But we all have to be committed. We have to udkhulu fi silmi kaffa wa la tattabi'u khutuwat ash-shaytan. See, the Quran says, all of you completely commit yourself to God's way in this world, that you are already operating according. Your body inside is naturally following a system that it was created with. You have a conscious decision to make about how I understand the system of words and actions and creative, structural, social reality, how I will make an impact and how I will join my fellow believers in making an impact. So So Ya Allah, we ask you to have mercy and forgiveness on all of our great scholars like Imam Gulen and all of the others in our community throughout our history. Ya Allah, help us to take an example from our leaders, and that we come together as believers and we work together for the truth, and that we look for the positivity and the benefit in the resources that you have given us, which are countless and many. We ask your favor. We ask you to bless us with a sense of love and unity for you and your Prophet ﷺ and each other as believers. Ya Allah, do not allow our hearts to be divided. Do not allow the power politics of shaitan and his allies to corrupt us or divide us. Ya Allah, do not allow us to have assumptions and suspicions about each other, and make us a people who genuinely stand for truth and justice, and that when we see wrong and we see corruption, we stand against it and we encourage each other to stand against it. Ya Allah, we ask your grace and your blessing and your forgiveness and your beautiful touch in the light of revelation, that it may move through our hearts, that comes out our words and our actions, that we may establish your message in this world so that people can appreciate it, that it can repair all of the brokenness, all of the poverty and the sadness, all of the ignorance and tyranny of the world. Ya Allah, make us be those instrumental stewards of change and righteousness that the world is in so much need of. Ya Allah, make us all worthy of the intercession of our beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and gather us all together in his hawd to drink from his blessed hand, that we may walk behind him into the gates of bliss, where we can look up and see that light and feel that light that was moving us from every moment of our existence, and we can embrace it as the most comforting reality that anyone can embrace. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.